Now, the spate of insecurity in Nigeria has lingered for years, leaving many dead in their wake and families displaced and some fleeing the country. Although the federal government and security agencies have developed various approaches to fight these bandits, kidnappers, has it improved the security situation in the country? Now, the Vice President, Kashim Shettima, has said the Tinubu-led administration will adopt a multi-dimensional approach to end insecurity in the country, especially the Northwest. He noted that there cannot be a military solution to the crisis in the Northwest. Instead, there should be a kinetic and non-kinetic solution. He further said that insecurity in the country is associated with poverty and social exclusion, which he says President Tinubu's measure would capture, given recourse to the root causes of banditry and insurgency. Joining us via Zoom from Abuja is a Managing Director, Beacon Consulting Limited, Kabir Adamu. Good morning. Thank you for joining us.
Good morning, Veronica.
Good morning. Good to see you.
Right.
Same here, Mike. Good morning.
Good morning.
Now, the statement of the Vice President talking about approaches to challenging the matter or addressing matters of insecurity in the country is similarly different from what we saw the Chief of Army Staff, Major General Taoreed Lagbaja, say when he hosted governors of Plateau State, as well as that of Zamfara State, where he said that there was not going to be amnesty for insurgents anymore, and that they were going head-on to tackle matters of insecurity. But when you place it side by side what the Vice President has said, what do you make of what the government is trying to achieve?
Thank you very much. First off, I think it's very early days. It's just about, if I'm right, 45 days or thereabout that the Bola Ahmed Tinubu administration has been in government. It is still trying to form its government. It has appointed a few leadership within the security sector. We're still waiting for additional appointments, especially the cabinet ministers, and then some few other positions. However, there are certain things that we know. Ahead of, during the campaign in particular, it released the Renewed Hope document. And in that Renewed Hope manifesto, there were about 7 points, what we call this security imperative of the Bola Ahmed Tinubu administration. And if anything, that for me is the guiding principle, the foundation, as it were, that would inform probably what the government would do. And there is one principal element there that I find quite exciting. In that document, it emphasized the desire to win the hearts and minds of the people. It also spoke about the socio-economic drivers of insecurity. So if you put these two things together, it tells me that perhaps the government's desire is to form a hybrid of both the kinetic and non-kinetic approach. I'll take us a little bit back to the Buhari administration. At the end of that administration, in a statement by the Defense Headquarters, they alluded to the fact that under the administration, the component of kinetic versus non-kinetic was 80% kinetic and then 20% non-kinetic. Now, what I am appearing to be hearing from this administration, even though, like I emphasize, it's still early days, is that they are going to change that ratio, change that 80 kinetic, 20 non-kinetic. Probably, they've not told us the percentage, but if we're going to pick those two things I mentioned, the desire to win the hearts and minds of the people, and then the need to address the socio-economic drivers of insecurity, then it appears they want to probably have either 50-50 or even more non-kinetic than kinetic. Now, it is not to say that kinetic is not important. So as an example, when the Chief of Army Staff makes that statement, I do not think the relevance is that he's going to drive the security imperative of the government. No, we have to look at the security structure. What is the position of the military within that security structure? I am one of the few that have argued that the military is just a component of our national security structure. There are about 29 ministries, departments, and agencies within the security structure. If you pick the military, there are only 4 out of that 29. So there is no magic arithmetic formula that you will use that 4 will supersede 24. Some can argue that their weaponry and their place within the security structure makes them more important than the others. And I say no. No government department, as it were, is more important than the other government department. In the security sector, I can argue from now till tomorrow, and I'll try to convince you that the military is not more important than the other security organizations. Rather, like the president has directed, they should work in collaboration. And so statements like that coming from the Chief of Army Staff, I don't think it's helpful to the desire by the president. There are coordinators within the national security architecture. Those coordinators are the ones that should make policy statements to support the government's desire. So some of these coordinators are starting from the Office of the National Security Advisor. Then by the time the ministers are appointed, you would have the Minister of Defense, Minister of Interior, Minister of Police Affairs. And then you can even push it further to the SGF, who is the governing element within all of that. He is the one who convenes the meetings. He is the one who organizes government instruments. When the president makes a directive, he's the one who picks it up. Then to an extent, you can also include the chief of staff to the president, whose office is somewhere in between the president and all of these persons that I've mentioned. Now, having said that, it means that there are governing bodies within the national security structure, such as the National Security Council and the National Police Council. They name them. They are all important governing bodies that help to coordinate what the government will do. In essence, what I'm trying to say is to buttress my early point that the government is still trying to form itself. It has not yet completed the formation of the government, but the renewed hope agenda and some of the statements that are coming out recently from the government. A good example is the pronouncement of the state of emergency on food security. Now, one of the things that made me really happy, and I must commend the Bola Ahmed Tinubu administration, is placing that strategy, that policy in the National Security Council. In the past, what we would have seen is perhaps a committee would be set up to implement that policy, and it will be lost within the myriad of several other committees that we have. But this time around, they placed it within a constitutionally recognized security body, which is the National Security Council. I can also mention to you that if you go back to the revised national security strategy, food security is mentioned there. So what this administration has done is to recognize that there are constitutional elements that can support in the achievement of its security imperative, and it is going about using those constitutional elements, and it deserves commendation.
All right. You mentioned that there are about 20 or over 20 security ministries, departments, and agencies of government, one way or the other, that have connection with issues around security. Now, it's over a decade that Nigeria has been grappling or trying to get itself off the murky waters of insecurity, intense insecurity. And we still have this over 20 MDAs. How is it that Nigeria, after so many years, is still trying to cope with it? We've changed service chiefs, we've changed national security advisors, we've changed DGs, we've changed ministers, and everyone that comes on board says, well, we're coming up with strategies, we're coming up with strategies, we're coming up with strategies, yet we still have the same issues over and over and over again. If it is the issue of bombing, those times, okay, now we don't have that anymore, but we still have issues of kidnapping, we still have issues of attacks here and there. What do you think is responsible for all of this? Because the over 20 security MDAs or security-related MDAs have always been on ground over the time.
So our national security is a function of our national power. National power has several elements within it, and one of the ones I would like to speak about is national cohesion. And for anyone who is interested in understanding where we are in national cohesion, there is a very good report by the African, Polling Institute, API. It's an independent body that puts together an index to show where we are in terms of our national cohesion. Now, the last time I checked, and I hope I'm right here, it placed us at about 40%. Now, 40% is below the global standard, which is, I think, about 50%. In essence, we're having this challenge because as a nation, the strength that brings us together to bind us and strengthen our togetherness is weak. And that is what the National Cohesion Index speaks. Now, why is it weak? The principal element there, even though there are several others, and I urge anyone who is interested to pick up that report and read it, the principal element is the perception and the reality of grievances within Nigeria. There is no geopolitical zone that you go to that you do not see this perception and reality of marginalization, as it were. The most prominent one that people speak about is the Southeast. And today it has given birth to an insurrection, call it insurrection, call it insurgency, separatism, that is killing or has even killed the economy of the Southeast. The same thing if you go to some parts of the Southwest. If you go to the North, the Fulani embroglio, for lack of a better word, is a function of that perception of marginalization. There's an famous interview by one of the bandit leaders, Turiji. In that interview, he spoke about how his dad was subjected to what he called injustice. And then as his reasons for picking up their arms. Now, I'm not excusing his action. All I'm saying is that as a country, if we want to move forward, then we need to identify these drivers of insecurity. And I've just pointed to one. What are the others? And the others are the socioeconomic circumstances, poverty as an example. The last time the Bureau of Statistics released a report on that, it showed that there are over 133 million Nigerians that are subjected to what it calls, poverty. It's multidimensional poverty. The last time we were also giving statistics on unemployment, depending on the category you're looking at. It starts from, I think, about 33% up until about 70%. And then, of course, issues around gender inequality. Women are not being represented, are not given equal opportunity to participate, youth, name them. And then, of course, we can also move to issues around the porosity of our borders that is allowing illicit weapons, illicit drugs, and whatever to come in. And then you can also talk about the proliferation of small arms and light weapons. Then this constitutional structural issues, for instance, issues around the desire of some states to move ahead in certain areas, including security. Just not too long ago, the Lagos State Assembly passed either a bill or a motion on the desire for state policing. That's an issue that we haven't really discussed. Identity crisis in North Central Nigeria. So all of these are the drivers of insecurity that speaks directly to your question, and they affect our national power. It's only, of course, I can also talk about our foreign policy and the challenges regarding the implementation of our foreign policy. It's also an element within our national power. Then the security sector itself. And in speaking of the security sector, there are two major issues that I would say influence principally our national power there. And that is security sector governance, which I spoke about earlier on. How are we bringing all of these 29 ministries, departments, and agencies together? None of them, and I made that point earlier on, can function on its own. And I'm very happy the President, Bola Ahmed Tinubu, has championed that. He speaks of collaboration. He speaks of cooperation. He speaks of coordination. In social science, we say the sum of the parts is greater than the whole. And that tells you that in security, as an example, none of these single parts, none of these 29, or even if you bring 4, which is the military, can function without the support of the others. Those who designed the national security structure had that philosophy that they were going to work together. And I like giving the example of our borders. It is not the role of the military to prevent the flow of illicit weapons into our country. That's, if you pick their section, I think 217 of the Constitution, that provides the mandate of the military, there is nothing there that speaks about border protection. There are 2 departments in government that speaks about that, and that is the immigration and to an extent customs, even though principally customs is not a security department. So the point I'm making is, if you pick national security, each of these MDAs, 29 of them, has a role to play. And if we do not recognize that and go back to security sector governance in such a way that the coordinators that I mentioned earlier on see this 29 as a moving body that has different parts that need to work together. And in doing that, we introduce M&E, that is monitoring and evaluation, to show us how each of these parts is contributing to the national security imperative. I mentioned earlier on that there is a 7-point agenda by the Bola Ahmed Tinubu administration. We need to introduce M&E that would show a linkage of how each of these elements is contributing to the desire. And that desire is captured in section 14 of our constitution. So each of the M&E function that we bring in has to show how all of this is contributing. The second element in the security sector that would determine our national power is the issue of security sector reform. We are coming from a history of military governance. And just to buttress this point, EndSARS happened. We all know why EndSARS happened. And I'm sad to say you were a victim of EndSARS. You more than any organization knows the anger of the people with regards to the heavy-handedness of some departments within the security sector. How much of security sector reform have we done to incorporate the civil rights of the average Nigerian within the functions of those security organizations? So until we do that, and the average Nigerian recognizes that the security departments are there to work for him so that he can now support their operations, then sadly, we would not be able to see the security sector as contributing to our national powers. Rather, it would be contributing against it. Because today, from almost all the polling available, the security sector, sadly, is perceived as Nigerians as one of the first of corruption. Then when it comes to heavy-handedness, it's perceived as somewhere in the top. So to answer your question directly, these are the things that would need to be addressed if these 29 MDAs are going to contribute to the desire of an improved security, where I can travel in my car from here to my state. I live in Abuja. I can travel all the way to Sokoto, whatever time of the day. Or I can even travel as close as Kaduna without the fear of being stopped by abductors, being stopped by anyone on the road, including our security departments. If you've traveled to Benue from Abuja, you would know what I mean. The number of checkpoints you would see, and the fact that, I hate to say this with all sense of responsibility, they're collecting money from those that are traveling on those routes. So those are the things that affect the functions of the NDA.
Now, the Vice President in his statement actually talks about addressing these matters, the root causes of, these key drivers that you have mentioned. And I am wondering, because there are a myriad of issues that you have mentioned, but if we are to look at the low-hanging fruits that we can easily address, such that Nigerians can begin to see some level of results from all of the effort government is making at addressing this matter of insecurity, what will that be?
On a light note, give me that responsibility. I would be able in 3 months, solve it. But that's me being. More seriously, I think some of the early steps by this administration are extremely commendable. Yesterday, I listened to the recently appointed service chiefs at the House of Reps, and I was delighted with the statements coming out from them. There is a need for caution. I spoke earlier on. I don't think the Chief of Army Staff is not in his place to make some of the statements he has made. He should leave that to the coordinating elements. I would have been happier if it was the Chief of Defense Staff, but even him, he's an operational coordinator. He's not a policy coordinator, as it were. So they should take a step back, learn from their predecessors. I think General Lucky Irabor did amazingly well. And I've worked closely with him, in certain capacities. So I know the extent he went to ensure that the military is taken back to, its traditional role as encapsulated in Section 217 of our Constitution. Now, with regards to low-hanging fruits, earlier on I spoke about security sector governance. If this administration can go back to our Constitution and ensure that each of these organizations sticks to its mandates, and these mandates are very clear. The second element, which I haven't spoken about, which is also a low-hanging fruit, is the role of the National Assembly. They, in our democratic setting, have a responsibility for legislation and oversight. Now, we need to see that. And I'm sorry to say, with all sense of responsibility, their baby steps are quite shocking. Last week, we had them advising the president to call on the office of the, rather, they moved a motion for the office of the National Security Advisor to declare a state of emergency, which is them ceding their power. The Constitution places that responsibility on them. So how can they now cede their power to the office of the National Security Advisor when constitutionally he doesn't even have that power? Even the president has to confer to them before he can declare a state of emergency. So that worries me a lot. And thirdly, it's a function of the attrition rate within the National Assembly. About 70%, I think 75% of the members of the 9th National Assembly did not return in the 10th Assembly. So that's one of it. So that's one low-hanging fruit. They need to quickly strengthen their capacity for security oversight and security legislation. The staffers within the National Assembly will need to play a bigger role than what they're doing at the moment. The last low-hanging fruit is the role of the media. Your role as the fourth estate of the realm, as it were, needs to be strengthened in the security sector. And I must commend a lot of what you guys are doing, but there is a need for more. Just to give you an example, the report you read by the vice president, he made a statement there. He called, and most of the media reports that I saw called what he said Fulaka. Now, as a person with Fulani background, I did a little bit of research, and my honest opinion is that what he probably meant is the word Fulaka. Now, there are two different things. If you're going to address an issue that is principally related to the Fulanis, and then the reporter did not take his time to research that issue, to understand that the concept is called Fulaka, then imagine how the average Fulani would feel in terms of carrying him along. The point I'm trying to make is that there is a need for the media to be a little bit more focused and intentional in researching issues, especially when they are outside the usual comfort zone. Pulaka is a Fulani philosophy, and the spelling is P-U-L-A-A-K-A, not like the media, most of the media and print media reported it as F-U-L-A-K-A. It's a concept in Fulani that speaks about ethics, that speaks about cultural norms that the average Fulani accepts and encourages. And I think if that is what the government is trying to do, it is hugely commendable. That concept, growing up, is a concept that most Fulanis could tie themselves around, they could relate to. Now, if the administration wants to do that, so all of these are low-hanging fruits, and I'm hoping that over the coming days, especially once these ministers that I mentioned, Minister of Interior, Minister of Defense, Minister of Police Affairs, to an extent, Minister of the Attorney General of the Federation, once all of these are appointed, then I'm hoping to see traction in most of these directions. Strategic communication, I cannot overemphasize that. I've seen some disjointed statements coming out of some principal persons within the administration. Now, there is a need to address that so that the government speaks with one voice. Remember, I spoke about the government aspiration to carry along the people, get their buy-in, win the hearts and minds of the people. One of the best ways you can do that is through security. And if you speak one language where people trust you, all government officials should understand the relevance of communicating in a manner that Nigerians are able to relate to and tie to. And then I think we would find traction in our aspirations to have improved security.
All right. It's good to really explain that Pulaka philosophy that you mentioned earlier. It's really very important. But thank you. Now, Nigeria has assumed the chairmanship of ECOWAS, and viewing things from the perspective of foreign policy, the security challenge that Nigeria has had in the past, there has been explanations regarding how cross-border insecurity has worsened the situation in Nigeria, especially with the proliferation of small arms and light weapons from Libya and others coming in from Mali, Burkina Faso, and so on. Now, Nigeria has assumed the chairmanship of ECOWAS. How would that help when it comes to trying to galvanize the other African or West African countries to speak in one voice and adopt a strategy towards ensuring the security in the country and in their own countries as well?
So again, ECOWAS is a regional multilateral platform. It's a platform that allows the West African sub-region to galvanize itself towards the achievement of certain objectives and priorities. Some of the challenges within the sub-region, as you very well know, for me, the major one actually is the failing, I would say, democratic traditions and norms within the country. I think in all the regions of the world, there is no part that where democracy is failing like the West African sub-region. So I think that's number one. And the good thing is Nigeria has something to show, irrespective of the unfortunate, I think, statement by the EU, which I'm sure, I hope that we're addressing as a country regarding our elections. This Fourth Republic is the longest republic that we've had so far. And so it's something to be happy about. It's something to commend anyone who has played a role within it. Are we there yet? No, we're not there yet. But we've made huge steps toward entrenching democracy. And I think that's the kind of commendation I'm hoping to hear from our development partners. And so that's something we can transfer to this West African sub-region. How, despite the multidimensional challenges, the political difficulties that we're encountering, how have we been able to sustain our Fourth Republic up until this point, and hopefully, even longer. That's something that I think other countries within the sub-region, where sadly we're seeing a failure of democracy, can buy from. Terrorism. Several affiliates of the two major terrorist, global franchises, the Islamic State and Al-Qaeda, are domiciled in the Sahel. A huge part of the Sahel is actually within the West African sub-region. And I don't think there's any part of the world where terrorism is growing at the rate at which it's growing in, especially Islamist jihadism. There are other components of terrorism. The homegrown one in the US is bigger than what we have in the Sahel, but Islamist terrorism particularly is growing within the Sahel and, of course, within the West African sub-region. We have a very robust counter-terrorism strategy in Nigeria. The ECOWAS sub-region has a terrorism, I think, agenda with a fund that I spoke about. If I remember well, I think it was launched in 2001. The last time I checked, not even up to 30% of the goal that they need to achieve within that fund has been achieved. So point is, there is so much that Nigeria can do, but our foreign policy instruments are the ones that can help us achieve that. The Ministry of Foreign Affairs and several other components within that foreign policy instrument. And sadly, they are beset with challenges that we need to address.
Yes, we have to end this conversation now because we have run out of time. But we must thank you, Kabir Adamu, Managing Director, Beacon Consulting Limited, for your time on the program. Thank you so much.
Thank you, too, for having me.
Thank you.
Right.